Welcome to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered with Perry Clark. This program looks at mental health from unique perspectives and shows you how to manage your life by finding the knots that help you and stay away from the ones that could be a disadvantage. Now, here is your host, Perry Clark.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Untying Knots. Now, because of a little screw up on my part, we've had to make some adjustments to our name. So it is still Untying Knots. It's now Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. That's because I didn't do as much research as I should have done, and I discovered it then. In the meantime, I also want to remind everyone that this is not a place to consider you're getting therapy. We do strongly recommend that you speak with therapists in your area who can speak to your specific issues, and that this is for educational entertainment purposes only. So today on Untying Knots, I am here and with our wonderful guests, Monet Goldman, who is a Japanese Jewish American therapist and native of the San Francisco Bay Area, who is trained as a child and family therapist. And one of the tools is play when working with children. Monet felt a need to develop more ways to work virtually with his kids, and that included the area of video games. With the COVID and the shutdowns, this made this process that Monet had developed even more useful. Monet has been featured in the Washington Post for his work with kids working with Roblox. And overall, he works trying to help families change the stigma around the problematic associations with gaming. Welcome to Untying Knots, Monet.
Thanks, Perry, for the great introduction. I'm happy to be here. I think it's nice to meet another, geek-themed therapist who, can invite me to talk about video game therapy without trying to maybe address the label of addiction or video game addiction. Very much, pro gaming, healthy gaming as a lifestyle balance could be more of a focus. But, yeah.
Exactly. And especially now in the day where we have $1 billion industries focused around video games, let alone the development of esports, and the fact that in some ways this is getting just as large of events as you get with the Super Bowl, depending on what your field is. But before we get deeper into the gaming aspects, how did you become a therapist?
Wow, great question. I've always wanted to be a therapist in high school. I think like many other Silicon Valley students, I was taking all these AP classes, honor roll, and the one class I didn't take that was an AP class, or even in high school, was psychology. But I found myself always going to the psychology section and stayed away from it just because I was told that I couldn't make a living out of it, that, it was dead-end career. And so I kind of brushed it aside. But as I kind of got into, Cal Poly in the psych classes, I really grew to appreciate it and kind of learned that your job, your career is going to be, a majority of your life. Even if it is 8 hours a day, you're doing more than that. And so why not do it in something that can be creative, that can really inspire you? And so, I kind of made the plunge there once I was at that crossroad of, do I go down medicine, med school? My brother's doing that. So, I no longer have to carry that mantle. But I just figured, what's the way I really want to help people? And I think being a therapist made the most sense to me. Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful. Mind you, and when I was in school, they didn't have a psychology class. I did work a bit as a peer counselor. That wasn't exactly the experience I figured, and I think it was actually before I was ready to be in this position that I am now. So it's amazing how the past and the present change us. Mm-hmm. And speaking of that, and as I said earlier, video games is $1 billion industry out here that's generating a fair amount of jobs and a fair amount of interest, and something that helped us, for many of us, get through the pandemics. But that, as we said, has come with the issue, like so many, with the issue of addiction, but just the aspect of how is it being also used to keep our mental health stable. Mm-hmm. So please enlighten.
Well said. Gosh, I mean, that's actually why I started gaming. I hadn't touched my gaming PC in 3 years, you know, because I was still busy coaching like judo and wrestling and competing. I've been a high school, college, wrestler, judoka, and so I kind of continued that path. And then once COVID shut down, I didn't have that same outlet. It's a very unique outlet because it's like, well, what's the strategy? Where's the intensity, the fun of it? And really the only thing I could find were video games that could really immerse myself into this. And so, I fired up my PC in May and just started playing. And I just had this amazing, just therapeutic experience where, for the half hour in that round, I forgot about all the COVID fears, all the, fears related to my clients, what's going to happen to my family. So I realized, okay, if I'm benefiting from this, it's like an instant anti-anxiety, antidepressive experience. This is happening for our kids that we're trying to help. And so why not join in with them? And so by literally experiencing what they're experiencing, but then also applying my kind of therapeutic lens and really understanding, okay, this is how it can be helpful. This is how we can kind of, I guess, combine video games as a medium, as a space to also do the therapy that we've been trained to do.
Beautiful, beautiful. And I believe one of the most venues that you particularly like using is Roblox. So how did that come into connecting into being this venue that allowed you to have this connection and also the connection when you're working with kids?
Yeah. It's funny. I've known of Roblox for 4 years. So I started working at the schools, say probably 2018, and kids would tell me about it. And I didn't really care about it until, because my games are, World War II strategy games, shooters, things like that. And Roblox is a very, kid-friendly game, and it's there are fun games. So when people accuse me of just wanting to play video games, and I'm like, no, I do not want to play this game in my free time. I'm strictly doing it for the kids. And then once I log off, I play, like Call of Duty or something else. But, it started during the pandemic. All we had were, phone sessions, and it was terrible. I do a 10-minute phone call with a 9-year-old, and, we just couldn't connect. And so I just kind of asked her hey, what would you like to do? And she's like, well, maybe we could play Roblox. I was like, well, I mean, I guess maybe. And I was just all these things running in my mind. Is this okay? What's the ethical, legal stuff? Do I need to ask my supervisor? And then she fired up, her PC and invited me in. And then we had an hour-long session. And it was phenomenal. I mean, she was showing all her interests, all her character developments, she started helping me. So you saw all these helping behaviors. You saw all this positive emotional expression, really great communication, social skills. And those are the things we're trying to build. And so why not do it within the game through play together? Because that's how kids learn, is through play.
Yeah. And I know I've listened to some other people who talk about reminding people that kids don't tell, they show. So that aspect of the parent who's expecting us to sit down and have a same type of discussion that they would have about what's going on in their marriage with the kid is that's not happening whatsoever. The kid is that level of sophistication, that level of internal insight, which is just not there. It's what's being developed in the kid.
Right.
And it's much more easily for them to externalize that through the game.
Right. That sometimes is the tough part about being, a child or play therapist, is when you have the parental expectations of okay, sit down, and talk about this. And I've had kids just be like, no, like, just, like, mom, get out of the room. Like, and so I think it's funny because we put all this pressure on kids, and then we have adult clients too, who also need, help getting into session, reducing that initial anxiety. So, I think kids kind of get have a hard, there's just a lot of obstacles, and trying to find what therapy is can be more difficult in some ways, at least for parents to understand.
Well, especially in some ways, because the parent probably feels disempowered. They don't know what's going on. They can't help their kid. They're expected to help their kid. And yet the kid can't actually tell them what's actually going on because the kid hasn't figured it out itself. But they can show it in the play, which is what we're often taught with things like sandbox play. I know around the time that I had first met you and I was doing a little more research on this, I know I heard someone else who had done a YouTube talking about using Minecraft as a location as well. So can you speak to some of the experience you've had that beyond just Roblox?
Absolutely. Minecraft has been really interesting. There's been opportunities to like maybe build physical representations of like emotion, what they're feeling, even memories. I might prompt them like, okay, like maybe we can build something that like represents, a memory or like a feeling we had. And then they'll have those tools, because a lot of the kids, if it was outside of a software program, would have a hard time creating something accurate. But then you just have within the game, you can just pick and choose and build and craft with kind of without needing programming skills or art skills. And so it's been a great accessible way for kids and adults too, to really kind of communicate what's going on with them. Yeah.
If you can, without breaking confidentiality, can you give us a small story about how one of those situations, much like you did with the other one who introduced you to Roblox?
Yeah, sure. So, I've also done groups. So in, say, a group, I started with that simple prompt, like, okay, guys, like, let's all, try and create something that represents a memory or a feeling. And so one kid was, joking around, and he was like taking us over to this like tiny, tiny little box. Like, what's that? And he's like, oh, that's how much happiness I have inside of me. And so, sometimes it's a joke, sometimes it's also like serious, humorous way of showing like he's feeling sad. And then we drove over to another wall created by this girl. And the way it was painted, the color scheme, a lot of red and brown and black. And, then they started talking about this kind of traumatic memory from witnessing some violence. And it just wasn't really talked about other than from that kind of exercise. And so, this was somebody who's been in therapy for a long time, and then had this opportunity, this new creative way to express something that they hadn't been able to express for a long time.
Beautiful. What advice would you give for those that are hesitant and feeling like they aren't comfortable with doing video game work? I mean, when we deal with therapy and we're thinking about it, and you think about some of the people who do this as a second and maybe even a third career, they're not as tech savvy or interested in using technology. And let's be frank, as I know, when I was at the agency I used to be at, one of the things I said to so many of them who were dealing with kids is like, you need to learn what's going on in these video games, these places. These are the stories of today's. These are not just Cinderella and Snow White like we see with Disney and so forth. Gears of War or Mario Kart or or even Naruto and so forth that have video games, if not just so forth. They all have a very interesting story and richness to their world. my advice was always, okay, you can Wikipedia the game to get the synopsis about what the story is. You can go to YouTube and put in playthrough or walkthrough, whatever the name of the game is, and watch some of these videos of people playing the game just to get a sense of what your client's doing. Just because you aren't comfortable picking up a controller doesn't mean you can't know what's going on with these things. And that becomes some place that you can talk with your clients about.
Mm-hmm. Well said. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, even though I grew up with watching Dragon Ball Z and, wow, Gears of War, it's a phenomenal game. Just brought me back. Even for me who grew up watching anime, sometimes I'll do a quick, Google search synopsis, and that's kind of like your entry point into psychoeducation around anger. It's like, boy, Goku's going into Super Saiyan mode. Like what's happening there for him? He just saw his friend die, how's anger maybe even beneficial here, but then also how is he using that anger? What kind of values are driving him there? And so, you do get a lot of, opportunities to talk about philosophy. What's been really helpful when I didn't know was highly recommend Geek Therapy as the Facebook group. There's the Let's Play Therapy Institute, and they actually have trainings on how to use video games in therapy. You can actually get CUs. So, they're a wonderful team. And I also, do some trainings and consultations. On a whim, I also created just a little tutorial on how to use Roblox. And so I'll probably start creating more videos now that I have more time. So I do have my own YouTube channel, and right now it's only just one video, but I've had people ask me if I wanted to create a course and things like that. For now, I just kind of enjoy showing what I do and presenting it through video or even through my blog. So, that's another way to keep in touch and learn more about it.
Oh, we'll definitely cover some of that at the end. I think one of the other things, as you mentioned, was talking about helping families shift around the stigma around video games and just playing games in some regards. What have you encountered there?
Yeah, I don't know if it's a uniquely Silicon Valley thing, but there just seems to be such a huge focus on, your job, your work, education, getting, highly competitive out here. But there's not a lot of emphasis on play or self-care or, recovery. So, I think I had the benefit of having a dad who also played games. So, he's a gamer. He actually plays more than I do now that he's retired. Sometimes I'll see him on Blizzard and I'll see his username and he'll be playing like StarCraft or something. So, really, and there's a lot of studies that show like gaming can help, reduce probability of getting Alzheimer's just from the brain activity, the stimulation. But I would say, I think the importance of play is really not recognized. I think kids really need play to process difficult things. Also to, sort out those difficult emotions. And adults need play too. I think, we're going through a lot of burnout and fatigue because we're not having fun. And that was the main thing when I started doing the video game therapy thing. Is like, it's so hard to have fun at the height of the pandemic. Like, let's have fun. Like that in itself was such a hard thing to happen.
Yeah. So with that being said, what do you think are some of the things that you definitely want people to take away, at least on the video game front, from all of this, and especially that importance of play? Because we're both geeks. We or blurs or nerds, depending on what you want to put it. We're all both gamers, and we are dealing with the aspect of now as the, shall we say, younger generation that's coming into psychology do see games and video games as part of our mechanism of use when it comes to therapy. I know I was a long time ago when I was talking to my supervisors, like, yeah, I'm putting PlayStation in my office when I finally can, because I feel that's a way to use it. And there, some of them were saying, "Oh, that you can do that with your own office." Others were sort of scoffing. It's like it has no place. It divides, and for some cases, it does. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's so interesting because, I had in my wrestling room locker room, we had an N64, and we would play right before practice, and I used to get so anxious before practice, before matches. But like when we played, it was so fun. Forgot about all the anxieties. And then we just go straight into practice. And I didn't have that, I guess you can say, stewing of anxiety that went in. And then I had much better practices. And so I think, I also worked, in the boys ranch, with probation, youth, and we would have music as a way to set the stage. Even Beck, is it of the CBT, kind of Beck CBT. There's a YouTube video.
Could you expand on that just in case anyone who doesn't know what CBT is?
Oh yeah,
or who Beck is?
Right. So Beck, I guess you could say, so CBT is cognitive behavioral therapy. And I guess you could say it's like one of the more like researched therapies. And so Beck is, I guess, kind of recognized as like father of cognitive therapy. And so, I also work with like some patients with schizophrenia symptoms. And so I was looking up YouTube videos where he would talk about working with clients with schizophrenia symptoms who are hospitalized. He talked about one therapist who started the session listening to music and playing video games, building that rapport, building that therapeutic alliance, and then having a conversation about, what were your kind of childhood dreams, or what were kind of things you always wanted to do. And the goal there was kind of cognitive restructuring in a way that, you wouldn't even guess that it was happening. And so I think that's a misconception of what CBT is supposed to be. Is like, here's the father of it saying, we use music, we use video games, we ask this like nice kind of question exploring around what they want. And it's really client-centered. It's not really directive. You might think, oh, cognitive restructuring, like I'm going to sit there, I'm going to challenge your thoughts, I'm going to argue with you and debate you. That's not what happened at all. He saw this person as a person, asked them, well, what were your goals? What would you want to do? They didn't use even the word goal. It's like, what do you want to do as a kid? And the patient client talks about how he, I think, wanted to be a mechanic. He's like, I always want to be a mechanic. And, but I could just never like see through those tiny little pipes, and I couldn't like get to the screws. And so the therapist just asked like, well, have you ever had your eyes checked? The guy's like, no, I've never had my eyes checked. Guy's eyes checked. Turns out he needed glasses. Turns out a lot of his, kind of defiant behaviors kind of resulted from like feeling really inadequate, not being able to like kind of fulfill these, bigger goals. And so, that's what we're all trying to do, is we're trying to create that stage and that relationship for them to open up, to feel safe enough to kind of reveal these things and kind of find their path, and for us to help them get there.
So just before we go to break, and I would love to have more time for this one, what are you seeing when we try to talk about video game play with older clients, so adults, maybe in seniors? Like you said, your father's gotten a very good interest in World of Warcraft, I'm assuming, and StarCraft and Blizzard. Yeah. So what are you also seeing when it comes to video game play with more adults as opposed to just kids?
Well, here the research, there's actually a lot of research going like Google Scholar, and actually heard about a lot of this stuff in grad school. When working with veterans, they with PTSD symptoms, there was one research study done with veterans and who would play Call of Duty, and they would get kind of activated or somewhat triggered by like driving by in the Humvee with the burning gas, and then they kind of have those sensory experiences. But then there was enough distance for them to actually utilize the kind of self-regulation, like deep breathing skills taught in therapy. And so it was therapeutic in that sense. And I think my guess is you can definitely structure it better with adults too. Like there's more of an intention. I think, there's one where women had agoraphobia, I think, huge fear of spiders, didn't want to go out into the woods. And so they had her hooked up to a VR headset where she would like kill a spider in the game. And then she got to the point where she overcame her fear of spiders. She was able to go hiking in the woods. So I think the benefit there is you could really drive home just the goal or the intention of what a person is trying to do in therapy there. Whereas maybe with kids, it's a lot, to me, it sometimes feels like improv. I'm just like, all right, what are we going to have today? And then I'm going to work with what's given to me there.
All righty. I think that's a good place for us to take a break. Mm-hmm. So we'll be back shortly with Monet Goldman.
Have you friended us on Facebook yet? Why not? Just go to facebook.com/Voice America or search for the keywords Voice America. Once you are part of our Facebook network, you'll receive daily messages about what's happening with our shows, this week's featured guests, and new happenings at the Voice America Talk Radio Network. And you can add your voice to the always active discussions on our timeline. Just go to facebook.com/Voice America or search for Voice America.
Our lives and the world around us can get messy and frustrating. Untangle and Grow Counseling's focus is to untangle that mess and make sense of it so you have a good foundation to build and grow from. Visit us on the web at untangleandgrowcounseling.com. Perry Clark offers individual psychotherapy, couples and family therapy, and adolescence therapy from a variety of coping materials and resources. Visit untangleandgrowcounseling.com for more information.
Get the news on our shows and other happenings by following us on Twitter. Find us at VoiceAmericaTRN or twitter.com/VoiceAmericaTRN.
You are listening to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. If you have a question or comment about our podcast, send an email to pclark@untyingknotspodcast.com. That's pclark@untyingknotspodcast.com. And now, back to the program.
And welcome back. We're here talking with Monet Goldman, a therapist in the San Francisco Bay Area who is very skilled at doing video game play. But we're going to switch gears slightly here and talk about another element of Monet, and also something that I share with him, is being both men in the therapy field as well as being men who have a BIPOC, which is Black, Indigenous, people of color representation in this field. So I know when I approached you to speak on this was sort of a new experience that you hadn't expected someone to talk about with you. So what are your thoughts as you think about what it means to be a man in this field, as well as a man representing another nationality, since, let's be frank, much of therapy that we know today was built around the white Euro model?
Yeah, absolutely. I think your question really made me reflect on a lot of things I felt I needed to bury, actually, to kind of, I guess you could say, survive or navigate the system, the mental health system. Of course, now that I'm licensed, I have my own private practice, I'm free to say whatever I want. So it's very liberating. And now I kind of get to, I guess, flex my ideas a bit. So, I think starting out, right, often I felt pressure to focus in medicine or engineering. And, being a therapist was, not something that, men were supposed to do. So as I kind of got into this field, I did start to hear a lot of prejudices, and in some ways it feels tough even talking about it, because in a patriarchal society, it's really, not many spaces where, men are cut out. And so in therapy, men are really, represented that well, at least how we want to do therapy. So it did kind of make me feel nervous, but I also have a lot of, colleagues who are, white and white females. So, I think some of them will understand, of course. I think for the most part, it just felt indicative of maybe the problem, the fact that I didn't feel perfectly comfortable talking about it. So I think maybe I could start like just in undergrad itself. If you're a psychology student, you'll probably realize by now that, you're one of, in a classroom of 30, you might be the only guy in there. And there's one day where the professor just kind of asked the whole class, but really focused on the guys, the two guys, me included, say, okay, well, not to put the guys on the spot here, but who do you really think was? Yeah, who do you think's a better therapist, men or women? And I just did not understand how to even answer that truthfully. And it's just along the ways, it's just, I've heard people say men don't have the emotional capacity to be a therapist. I've even had clients that worked with other female therapists who told them that, they're working with a male therapist, and the female therapist might go like, ew, why would you want to do that? So it's really, I think it did affect me early on as I was trying to, build my own confidence within the art of therapy. I always kind of felt like I had to second guess myself, or I had to double check with, another female therapist. But I think the systemic issue became really inherent when I was working at an agency, and most of our clients were BIPOC men and boys. So I just asked, hey, where's the men of color group? Why don't we have a group for men to just talk about the kind of racism they're surrounded by and the difficulties navigating that? And the other male supervisor was like, that's a great question. And the problem is, the leadership are all white women. And so they don't even see it. They don't even know it's something that needs to be presented. And so that's kind of when I started to realize, okay, like this is, and I think after the George Floyd, the protests, I think a lot of, companies have tried to create that space and that channel. But there's always a barrier. And so I think until there's actually, people, men of color, BIPOC men, in those areas to put those ideas out and be able to carry them out, it's going to be hard. I do have a friend. He's, BIPOC male clinician as well, working in a eating disorder clinic. And he was just looking at the website. It's like, hey, it's all like young white women. Like, what about my people? What about people, other men out there who struggle with eating disorders? Like, this is why we're not able to help them or reach out to them is because they're not feeling welcomed when they go onto our website. And so thankfully, the CEO listened and they changed, that. But it's just, there's all these little blind spots, and it takes a lot of courage for the therapist to kind of speak out there. Mm-hmm. And of course, there might be retribution of sorts. So, it's always a risk, but it's good to take that risk.
Which is also counter to the idea that we bring ourselves as the tools mm-hmm. that are doing therapy with us when we are working with clients. And just that aspect, as you said early on, is like before you got to be licensed, like myself, you felt like you had to keep yourself diminished. Mm-hmm. And that's not good for you as a man being out in the world, let alone what does that also mean that you're bringing in with your clients? Especially in those moments where, you are identifying with them, but it just can't be recognized. Especially because we can't put it in the notes, mm-hmm. let alone how is that a way that is also healing for the client to realize, I'm going through it too, and they're not alone in this. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what about also from this perspective of being, because I know you mentioned that, the idea was you're supposed to be a doctor or an engineer as someone who has an Asian API or Asian Pacific identity. What does it mean for you to be going away from the gold standard of engineering and medicine to being a therapist?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was a tough road. Yeah, I did not get much support, but, I think having to pursue wrestling, because, wrestling was not something really supported either, as seen as a distraction from my studies, but I just kind of knew in my heart, like, this is what spoke to me. This is what I need to do. And I think it's super important now with all the anti-Asian, anti-API violence, happening, especially with COVID. So I think being able to reach out, connect, has been helpful. I also speak Japanese too, so I've been able to work with Japanese speaking families, kind of understand, some of the cultural elements, the variables at play too. But, I think growing up, if I reflect, it was kind of hard to understand why I struggled. And then, I had my wrestling coach and Japanese high school teacher. He was also half Japanese, half white. And, he kind of explained maybe, what the discrimination was like for him. He actually was the national champion in wrestling in Japan, I think in the 90s, but the laws there, the racist laws there, prevented him from representing Japan because his father was white and his mom was Japanese. And so, but thankfully it's different now. I mean, now you look at the Olympics 2021, you got a lot of half Japanese, half white, Japanese judo players winning gold. Aaron Wolf, he's actually from my mom's hometown. So that was really interesting. But it's just, it's hard to explain in something you can't exactly learn in a book or in a 2-hour, CEU class. So I think us as the tool of the therapist is the therapy, and doing my own work on that to, help support our clients. That's I think my goal. Yeah.
Well, I think we're definitely going to have a part 2 for this conversation in the future. What do you think to that?
Yeah, absolutely. More than happy to.
All righty. So in this last bit, we're going to go into what I hope to be a continual staple, which is the myth and realities. So what would you say, from your perspective and experience, is a myth and reality around mental health?
I think that there's a huge myth that there has to be something wrong with you to be in therapy. Mm-hmm. I think therapy can be something more of a catalyst for change, something to help you jump mm-hmm. levels. And it's really powerful because sometimes you come into a session and you talk about things you didn't even recognize were say like traumatic or impactful, and then you're there in the room and you have a therapist to kind of validate that, kind of highlight its impact, and you just kind of like surprised, like, oh wow, I guess that actually did affect me. So there's a lot of great surprises there that can really help you unpack, I think. I would say if you've never been in therapy, absolutely give it a chance. I mean, you don't really have anything to lose. Yeah.
Have you seen Shang-Chi and the Ten Rings?
Oh, now I'm glad you brought that up, because that's a huge win. It's a huge win. Yeah, I have not seen it, but I'm definitely planning to.
So believe me, as I was sitting there watching that, it's like, oh, there's a point where we can sit down and have therapy. There's someone we need to sit down and have therapy. Yeah. But that the shall we say, the stoic Asian or API entity, that's another one of those that sort of hits against that standpoint that something has to be wrong with you to have therapy. I know what comes up in the African American community, we've got pretty much plenty of issues, but like from the Asian standpoint, the sense of that stoicism, is there a way that's also its own form of what we're talking about?
Oh, 100%. Well, yeah, there's just so much shaming around what kind of emotions you're allowed to show and have. Yeah, I think there's just such a flood of, just memories, but also just things I could say to that. It's really, I think that's also where stereotypes come in on, like, say, multicultural counseling, of like stereotypes of like how you're supposed to work with an Asian family. And it's like, well, I mean, they can access emotions too. It's just, maybe they've just been shamed, or there's just been a lot of abuse. It's funny. I try to find research on, say like couples counseling with, Asian couples, and it's just no research being done. So a lot of our assumptions aren't even backed by research. They're just still kind of backed loosely by stereotypes, which is really unfortunate. Yeah.
So I think that's definitely going to be part of our part 2 conversation. And then you take that and throw in the video game standpoint to it as well. I mean, and that's probably one of the things we have to talk about is how video games have also played their role in couples therapy. I don't know if you want to talk about that or know somebody who does, but that's another area we can be looking at, since, again, we're dealing with the generations now who have existed and grown up with video games as being a part of that. So that's another topic. But in the meantime, where can folks find you to be able, if they want to talk more about some of these topics?
Yeah. So my website is www.videogamecounseling.com. If you just search my name, Monet Goldman, video game counseling, it should come up. I also have a YouTube channel, so feel free to subscribe as I start uploading videos. I also have an email list, but I think, just conversations with you, Perry, are really make me think about maybe even doing my own podcast down the line. And it's just such a great medium to, share your ideas. So, feel free to send me an email. You can definitely find all that information on my website. Yeah.
Definitely. And we'll put as many of those in the show notes as possible for people to find you. And I want to thank you for taking the time to come on here and talk about this stuff with me. And I definitely look forward to our part 2 conversation, which we'll have down the line.
Yes, absolutely. Always happy for a part 2. Thanks for having me on, Perry.
Not a problem. So, folks, this is Untangling Knots on Freeing Minds and Souls, Untethered, on the Voice of America Network. So tune in again for my next podcast. It will be coming out within 2 weeks, as we have another interesting guest talking about the world of therapy, mental health, as well as being BIPOC and so much more in this world. Thanks. See you soon.
Thank you for tuning in for Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. Be sure to join your host, Perry Clark, for another episode on the podcast coming soon on the Voice America Empowerment Channel.